You think cowboys spent their nights around the campfire, slicing into juicy, medium-rare steaks and enjoying fresh sourdough, but the reality of the trail was a slow-motion gastrointestinal nightmare. While Hollywood portrays the Wild West as a gourmet barbecue under the stars, the men driving cattle across the plains had mastered survival techniques for eating things that would make a modern health inspector faint. Here is the thing about trail food that sounds completely backwards. The very meat that was supposed to keep them strong was often a salted, shriveled brick that could actually kill them faster if they didn't know the secret hacks to revive it. Yeah, you heard that right. The open range was literally thousands of miles of beef on the hoof, but taking even a few bites of improperly prepared trail rations made your body panic and your digestive system go into a total lockdown. The salt content in a cowboy's daily pork ration was about 4 times higher than what your kidneys are designed to process in a 24-hour period. When you ate it, your body desperately tried to dilute all that sodium by pulling moisture from your own cells and organs, leaving you more dehydrated in the middle of a grassy plain than if you had eaten nothing at all. It was like trying to fuel a steam engine with dry gunpowder. Cowboys figured this out the hard way during those brutal months on the Chisholm Trail. Chuck wagons back then were basically rattling wooden boxes with extremely limited storage space for anything that wasn't dry or salted into oblivion. Fresh ingredients took up massive room and spoiled within hours under the scorching sun, so trail bosses had to choose between carrying varied food or more ammunition and tools for survival. Most chose the supplies, thinking they'd figure out the food situation later by hunting. Bad choice. Crews would watch their fresh supplies turn green day after day, forced to turn to their saddlebags for the real survival rations. Desperate cowhands would sneak bites of raw salted pork when the trail boss wasn't looking, only to become violently ill within a few miles of riding. Their bodies would cramp up, they'd get severe mountain fever symptoms, and their minds would start playing tricks on them under the heat. Some cowboys reported seeing shimmering oases and 5-star hotels on the horizon that were just heat mirages fueled by salt poisoning and exhaustion. The smart trail cooks, known as cookies, quickly learned that bad food could destroy a crew faster than any Comanche raiding party or lightning-induced stampede. Stories spread through every dusty saloon about crews found slumped over their saddles, dead from scurvy or dysentery while surrounded by thousands of head of cattle. These weren't just scary campfire tales, they were warnings. Clean, edible calories became more valuable than the silver coins in a cowboy's pocket. Seriously, cowboys would guard the flour barrel like a treasure chest because that's exactly what it was. When the good flour ran low, even the most loyal ranch hands would turn violent. Mutinies started over maggoty hardtack rations more often than they did over unfair pay or long hours. The legendary trail boss, Charles Goodnight, once said his biggest fear wasn't a cattle rustler or a desert rattlesnake. It was running out of drinkable coffee and edible salt pork with 3 weeks left on the trail. Smart cowboys realized they needed to become amateur chemists or risk watching their friends waste away in the middle of the world's largest outdoor pantry. The irony was perfect and deadly. Cowboys spent their lives chasing high-quality beef that was destined for fancy East Coast restaurants, but the most precious substance on their own wagon was a foul-smelling, rock-hard piece of dried bread. But here is where cowboys got creative. They started developing tricks that would make a modern food scientist impressed. After learning that raw trail rations were basically edible death, they had to innovate fast. Their first instinct? look to the ground and pray for a miracle. But they couldn't just sit there with their stomachs growling like confused coyotes. Smart cooks rigged up elaborate soaking and boiling systems using whatever they had. Buckets and iron pots became chemical reactors, designed to leach out the salt and rot before the food touched a human tongue. The trick was positioning the soaking barrels just right on the moving wagon so the constant vibration would help shake the excess salt crystals loose from the pork. Makes sense, right? Here is where it gets interesting, though. Cowboys quickly discovered that using dirty trail water for soaking was like trying to clean a window with mud. It was gross, so they developed a filtration routine, cleaning their water through layers of sand and charcoal before any food preparation attempt. This meant precious hours spent on preparation, but it was worth avoiding the trail trots. Then there were the sourdough starters. Cowboys became surprisingly good at biological engineering, keeping fermented dough alive in jars for months. These jars were guarded with a zeal that bordered on the religious, wrapped in blankets to keep the yeast from freezing at night or baking during the day. This makeshift lab could produce bread that provided the only source of B vitamins on the trail. Some cooks got so good at this that they could keep a single starter alive for 20 years, carrying the same ancestral bacteria from Texas all the way to the Montana border. But wait, it gets weirder. When fresh meat wasn't available and the salt pork was gone, desperate cowboys turned to son-of-a-bitch stew. This wasn't a joke. It was a visceral reality. They would use every single part of a slaughtered calf, heart, liver, brains, and even the marrow, boiling it into a thick, irony mess. The goal was to extract every possible nutrient to fight off the creeping exhaustion of the trail. To a modern palate, it sounds like a horror movie, but to a starving man on the 90th meridian, it was the difference between standing up and falling into the dust forever. The real problem with all these methods was that the weather didn't follow the trail schedule. Wagons could go weeks through dust storms without a clean water source to cook with, especially in the dead zones of the panhandle. Soaking and boiling worked better in some regions than others, depending on the alkali content of the local water holes. Well, clever cooks started combining techniques. They'd set up permanent boiling pots while also using desiccated vegetables, an early form of dehydrated food that looked like colorful gravel, but turned into a life-saving soup. The most successful trail cooks treated food safety like a military operation. Everyone had specific jobs, gathering dry buffalo chips for the fire, hauling water, or grinding coffee beans. Slacking off could mean a case of botulism for the whole crew, and the weird part is, these early methods actually worked pretty well when conditions were right. Cowboys could stay relatively healthy during a 2-month drive if the cook was a master of his craft. No relying entirely on the wagon meant gambling with everyone's lives every time they crossed a border into a new territory. Unfortunately, Mother Nature wasn't always cooperative, which forced cowboys to look for more reliable solutions. They needed something that didn't depend on having a perfect fire or clean creek water nearby. They needed something they could control themselves, even when the dust stayed stubbornly thick for weeks. Cowboys might have thought they'd solved their hunger problems once they learned to boil the salt out of their meat. But storing the stuff? That was a nightmare wrapped in canvas and sealed with false hope. Every chuck wagon carried massive sacks of flour and cornmeal, but those weren't your garden variety pantry staples. We're talking about massive porous bags that could hold 100 pounds or more, exposed to every bug and bit of trail grit between San Antonio and Abilene. Here is where things got disgusting fast. Flour sitting in a wagon didn't just stay flour for long. It became a living, breathing ecosystem. The moisture from the humidity would start rot from the inside out, turning your precious biscuit base into a slimy, foul-smelling mess that tasted like someone mixed river silt with old leather. Bacteria and weevils absolutely loved these dark, dusty sacks and threw parties that would make your stomach turn inside out. Then there's the infestation problem nobody talks about. These bags weren't airtight. They'd been used and reused for everything from grain to coal. Your fresh biscuits would pick up hints of whatever lived in that sack before. One day you're eating bread that tastes like stale corn. The next, it's got notes of rancid grease. Makes sense, right? Burlap absorbs everything like a hungry sponge. Cowboys discovered the hard way that their carefully guarded flour would turn into a maggot buffet within days, sometimes hours in hot weather. The irony was brutal. You could starve to death while surrounded by bags of calories that would make you sicker than eating a raw lizard left in the sun. Well, desperate times called for desperate measures. Cowboys weren't exactly known for giving up easily, especially when their lives depended on it. They started experimenting, trying anything that might keep their food from turning into a science experiment gone wrong. Some crews tried adding wild peppers or heavy doses of vinegar to their meat barrels, hoping the acidity would kill the nasty bits. Others rotated their supplies, constantly moving bags to keep the moisture from settling. No, these were just temporary fixes for a problem that demanded real solutions, and the weird part is, the answer was literally staring them in the face every time they looked at their campfire. The solution involved smoke, chemistry, and a technique that would accidentally revolutionize how we make beef jerky today. Cowboys were about to become accidental scientists, and their next discovery would change trail food forever. They weren't known for their scientific breakthroughs. But when your crew is dying of malnutrition and your meat tastes like rotting pond scum, you get creative fast. Here is where things get interesting. Some clever cook figured out that heavy smoke could actually save their meat supply. They started deliberately hanging thin strips of beef over low, smoky fires before packing them into the wagon. Sounds simple? Well, this jerky trick was pure genius disguised as primitive cooking. The process was brilliant. Cowboys would light controlled fires using green wood or buffalo chips, letting the thick, acrid smoke coat and blacken the exterior of the meat. They'd stop before it turned to ash, leaving behind a layer of carbon and hickory-flavored bark, coating the muscle fibers. Then they'd pack this dried meat into sacks and wait for magic to happen. And the weird part is, it actually worked. That blackened layer wasn't just seasoning, it acted like nature's own preservative. The smoke contained phenols and acids that killed off the bacteria that made meat go bad quickly. Think of it as the world's first chemical food shield, invented by guys who couldn't even spell preservative. Cowboys noticed their smoked meat stayed edible longer. Instead of turning green and slimy after just a few days, this charred beef could last weeks without becoming completely disgusting. The smoke didn't just trap the good stuff, it actually slowed down the growth of harmful microbes that thrived in regular saddlebags. What makes this even more amazing is that cowboys accidentally stumbled onto something we still use today. Modern liquid smoke and curing salts work on similar principles. That smoke changes the chemistry of the food, filtering out the rot and adding flavors that masked any remaining funk. Cowboys weren't trying to make fancy snacks. They just wanted meat that wouldn't kill them. The smoking method spread quickly because it actually saved lives. Word travels fast when you find something that keeps your crew from dying of food poisoning in the middle of a desert. Trail bosses started ordering their men to smoke every pound of beef before long treks. But even this clever trick had limitations. Smoked meat still couldn't perform miracles with truly rancid pork, and the process used up precious time and fuel. Cowboys needed backup plans for when smoke wasn't enough. Then there's something even more surprising that cowboys discovered about keeping their water and food fresh. They found that adding certain alkali hacks to their cooking created almost magical results that seemed impossible to believe. While cowboys were busy smoking their beef and cursing at spoiled flour, some clever cooks discovered something fascinating. Tossing a handful of saleratus, essentially early baking soda, into their cooking pots wasn't just about making biscuits rise. It was accidental genius. That white powder wasn't there for fluffiness. It was there for survival. Here's what happened. Cowboys noticed that food treated with saleratus stayed settled in the stomach longer. The acidity of the rotting meat was neutralized by the powder. It didn't turn that nasty green color as fast, and it didn't smell like a swamp after a week on the trail. Makes sense, right? Well, cowboys didn't know they were dealing with one of nature's most powerful pH balancers. Alkali kills the acids that bacteria produce. Modern science proves this works because alkaline environments mess with bacterial cell walls, basically destroying the little buggers before they can multiply. Cowboys stumbled onto this centuries before anyone understood what a microbe was. They just knew their stew lasted longer when the white powder sat at the bottom of the pot. But here's the weird part. Some crews swore their soda-treated water tasted better too. Sweeter. Less like drinking liquid dust mixed with disappointment. Cowboys would argue over which trail brand powder worked best. Arm and Hammer became popular later, though nobody could explain why. Maybe it was pure. Maybe it was just cowboy psychology at work. The really smart cooks hoarded saleratus, specifically for water treatment and meat revival. When the clean water ran low, they'd keep their soda powder hidden like gold. Food could rot, water could turn salty, but saleratus? That was life or death. Real treasure meant staying healthy enough to spend your paycheck in town. Then there's the practical side. Soda powder was easy to carry and didn't rot. Unlike other additives that dissolved or turned foul, saleratus stayed saleratus. Cowboys could fish out their containers, rinse them off, and toss them back into the wagon, recycling at its finest. Modern hospitals still use alkaline solutions for the same acid-neutralizing properties, and water purification systems sometimes include pH balancers. Those desperate cowboys accidentally discovered something that high-tech food industries use today. Not bad for guys who thought a bath was an annual event. Of course, saleratus wasn't perfect. It couldn't fix meat that was already a biohazard. It worked best as prevention, not a cure. Smart cowboys learned to add their powder to the pot immediately, not wait until problems started brewing. The saleratus trick spread through trail fleets faster than gossip about a gold strike. Trail bosses who ignored this method often found themselves dealing with sick crews and mutinous men demanding better grub. But even alkali had its limits when the drought lasted weeks and the food ran dangerously low. That's when cowboys needed something more dramatic than powders and smoke. While soda and smoke helped keep stored food fresher, cowboys still faced their biggest nightmare, being surrounded by miles of alkali flats where the water was poison and the grass was dry. That's when the craftiest cooks turned to what sounds like pure magic: cowboy coffee. The process was more than just a morning ritual. It was a life-saving water treatment system. Boil the nastiest trail water you can find, throw in a handful of crushed beans, and toss in an eggshell. Yes, an eggshell, to settle the grounds. The salt stays behind, the bacteria die in the heat, and the acidity of the coffee masks the taste of the minerals. Simple in theory, absolutely brutal in practice when you're rocking on a wagon with limited firewood. Some legendary cooks actually ordered special high-acid coffee beans specifically for their ability to neutralize the flat water of the plains. His crew thought he was crazy until they realized this concoction could save their lives during those endless weeks in the desert. The setup used cast-iron pots heated over buffalo chip fires, with metal pans positioned to catch every precious drop of brewed liquid. But here is where it gets interesting and dangerous. These brew stations needed constant attention because one wrong move could spill the only liquid that was keeping the men sane. Cowboys had to balance keeping the fire hot enough to boil out the impurities while not burning down their only source of shade, the wagon. Talk about high-stakes cooking. The fuel problem was massive, too. Every piece of dry wood burned for coffee was wood that couldn't be used for cooking the main meal or making emergency repairs. Some crews got so desperate they started burning spare rope, broken wagon spokes, even old leather boots, anything that would generate enough heat to boil the water. The smell must have been absolutely terrible. Then there's the strength issue nobody talks about. This six-shooter coffee was produced incredibly strong. We're talking about something that could practically eat through a tin cup if you let it sit. A thirsty crew of 12 cowboys needed gallons of this black gold daily just to maintain their focus, let alone stay hydrated enough to ride 12 hours a day. Smart cooks learned to time their brewing perfectly. They'd fire up the pot during the nooning, when the sun was high and the cattle were resting, making it easier to manage the delicate fire. Some crews even took turns staying awake at night to keep the coffee pot going continuously. The caffeine hit was their only medicine for the exhaustion. Ironically, their stolen time and precious beans literally became their lifeline. Cowboys discovered that the tannins in the coffee worked better than other additives because they didn't just mask the dirt. They actually helped bind with some of the heavy minerals in the alkali water, making it less toxic to the kidneys. Of course, coffee wasn't their only trick. When firewood ran low or the wind made fires too risky, cowboys had to get even more creative with their survival methods. While smoke and coffee were clever solutions, cowboys didn't stop there. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and some crews got downright creative with their food-saving tricks. The most popular backup plan? Adding alcohol to the water barrel. Now, this wasn't about getting drunk, though that was probably a nice side effect. Cowboys discovered that mixing a bit of cheap whiskey or medicinal brandy into their water barrel actually slowed down the nasty bacteria that made water taste like liquid dirt. The alcohol acted like a preservative, keeping their precious water supply drinkable for longer stretches on the trail. Smart, right? But alcohol wasn't the only weapon in their arsenal. Some crews swore by adding vinegar to their water barrels. Vinegar's acidic bite didn't just mask the horrible taste of spoiled water. It actually fought off harmful microbes, too. Cowboys would also toss in wild onions or whatever random herbs they could scrounge up from the prairies. Sage, wild garlic, even crushed prickly pear. Anything to make their food situation more bearable. It probably tasted awful, but it was better than dying of thirst or starvation. Of course, not every experiment ended well. Some cowboys tried using lead-lined pots or copper tubing they found at abandoned mines for their cooking systems, thinking the metal would keep things clean. What they didn't know was that these metals slowly poisoned anyone who ate from them. Cowboys would get sick, weak, and confused without understanding why their improved food setup was actually killing them. The trial and error approach cost lives, but it also led to genuine discoveries. Cowboys were basically floating laboratories, testing wild theories about food preservation while fighting for survival on the open range. While these makeshift solutions kept many crews alive, the most innovative cowboys were already working on something far more ambitious. Some trail bosses were experimenting with techniques that went way beyond simple boiling and flavoring, methods that could actually transform the way we think about food today. They developed emergency meat curing techniques that were surprisingly sophisticated. They'd collect salt from dry lake beds, which naturally contains nitrates, and use it to create a rudimentary corned beef that lasted for months. These advanced methods separated the amateur cowhands from the true survival experts. While landlubbers in the city worried about fancy recipes, seasoned cowboys were mastering chemistry and physics without even knowing it. They turned their chuck wagons into mobile laboratories where every experiment could mean the difference between life and death. The most successful cowboy crews weren't just good at riding. They were brilliant at staying alive through innovation, determination, and some seriously clever trail wizardry.